Mail call. Chow boogie. Chow, chow, chow boogie. Mail call.
I'm Rhodes Bailey, and welcome to the Asylum South podcast. With me today is Lauren Manning-Gandy.
Hey.
Chris Kinney.
Hey, guys.
Also with us in the studio are Jessica Lathran and Mike McCauley, and of course, Zach Rain King Thomas in the control room.
Hey, y'all.
Today on the show, we'll interview Columbia Mayor Steve Benjamin, who will also help us with a brand new segment we call Constituent Mail. But first, let's check in with the news. Well, President Trump's impeachment trial ended this weekend, but this week, Nikki Haley was in the news for criticizing the former president. The former South Carolina governor and dissatisfied customer that's not afraid to talk to your manager said that Trump let us down and, quote, we shouldn't have followed him. Now, this was a reversal of her prior position as a fervent Trump supporter when she was ambassador at the UN, which was itself a reversal of her vocal anti-Trump position during 2016. So did anybody check out the article about Nikki Haley? I think it was A Time for Choice or something to that effect, written by a man named Tim Alberta in Politico. It was a big article, very long.
Short novel.
Nikki Haley's Time for Choosing. Right. Got it right here.
So what did we think about this article?
First of all, it took me about 3 days to get through it, literally. But this is honestly some of the best reporting I have ever read. I mean, it blew me away. I thought that I was pretty up to speed on all things Nikki Haley, and there were numerous things in here that I had never heard before. I don't know about y'all.
Give us an example.
Like that she forced her adult boyfriend, now husband, to change his name from Bill to Michael.
Yeah, to
go by his middle name instead of his first name.
Yeah, that's true. Her boyfriend's name was, well, now husband's name was Bill, and she decided she wanted him to go by Michael. And I actually had heard that story from Chris Kinney's wife, Jenna. It was the first time I had heard that story.
You know, she has told that story. What
really?
Is this? Yeah, she has.
I've never heard this before.
So I need to ask her what the sourcing on that is, because apparently it's been floating around, right, for a while. I'll tell you about, in terms of the article. First of all, it was a great piece of reporting, but and I did come away with it being sort of a Haley critic over the years with newfound appreciation for her. I mean, I think, in terms of her qualities, this describes very accurately both her ambition and her cunning, and I mean that in the best possible way. The thing that left me with still reservations about her as an elected leader is something that, Alberta puts on the table very early in the article, which is she talks about the first time he interviews her, she talks about, she's defending Trump along the lines of, well, he believes it. That's what he believes. Right. As if, it's sort of self-executing and exculpatory at the same time.
Right. He says, well, don't you think that he's taken an oath, and don't you think this is dangerous? And she goes, well, he believes it. And that happens like several times. Like, that's the answer. She's not really answering his question. But also during the first third of the article, she also says, he's a friend. I care about him. I call to check on him and all that kind of stuff. And then by the very end of the article, she says, friend is a loose term. And all this, that's, keep in mind the first third of the article is pre-insurrection. And then after this, near the end of the article, it was more recently, and she says he let us down and we shouldn't have followed him. And she acts really surprised and hurt, as if I didn't know this was who he really was.
The thing that I think is interesting about sort of her approach to Trump, and I think it really tells you something about sort of her thinking, this is somebody who understands very effectively grievance politics and doesn't have sort of an ideological core to her. There are several people in the article on the record, describing that she is malleable in terms of her belief system. And so this
Best articulated by Lee Bright of all people.
I know. 100%, right?
Yeah, and you
Who
guys,
else was amazed by that?
I was very struck by it.
And Lee Bright is, of course, a very conservative former legislator.
Yeah. Yep. But, I guess my takeaway with it is we've come out of a period where we have a president who sort of creates his own reality and can justify his actions based on his own belief. Now, Nikki Haley is a far more sophisticated operator, and there are some real anecdotes in here about moral courage around the Confederate flag. But still, the thing that leaves me with tremendous pause is, no ideological core, huge ambition, very cunning, and at the end of the day, it's about how she feels.
Yeah, and on that point that you made about no ideological core, in the article, State Senator Tom Davis is quoted as saying that the only politician that he had ever seen that he felt was comparable in charisma and skill as a politician was Bill Clinton. But I actually think, for exactly the reasons that you just articulated, that she's actually a lot more like Donald Trump.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I almost mean that in a complimentary way. Like the qualities that he
How does that work?
is he has raw political skill. I mean, he's able to sniff out where the voters are, his voters, and to be there regardless in a way that a lot of politicians don't.
Right, and Bill Clinton was actually a policy wonk. He
Right.
really liked nerdy politics or nerdy policy discussions, and he would always try and explain them and simplify them for people to understand. Haley is not a policy person, although she calls herself a, quote, policy girl in there.
That
which
was
is
the
kinda
funniest part of the whole article.
Yeah,
I had the same reaction.
she's so savvy and she's got raw talent, but the thing she has in common with former President Trump is that, like you said, she's good with people and with crowds, and she'll be what she sort of needs to be
Right.
there.
Quick trivia question. Do y'all know, this is one of my favorite subjects, the only bill that Haley sponsored and passed as a legislator?
Unlicensed beauticians.
Yes. You remember the ad that I made?
You did. You explain that to us, Lauren.
Okay, so when Haley was running the first time in 2010,
As governor, running for governor.
running for governor. I was working for Vincent Shaheen and got very familiar with his extensive policy background and everything that he had sponsored as a legislator. And in comparing records, found out that even though she had been a member of the majority party for, I think, 3 terms before she ran, the only piece of legislation that she sponsored that was passed and signed into law was a bill to allow people who are not licensed cosmetologists to wash hair in hair salons. I made a...
That was her whole legislative...
But in her defense, I mean, you get some explanation. I mean, whether you believe all of it or not, but you get some explanation for that, right? Which is that she comes in and is immediately hated by people who she thought we share a political party and an ideology, and it's almost like I think about her and how she sort of pivoted with her political career. I mean, obviously not a prolific legislator, but a hugely successful politician, right? And she reminds me of one of those Congress people who you see reports of now who aren't bothering to hire legislative staff. They just hire comms teams as
Wow.
they get, as they're elected to
I
Congress.
didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing now.
Well, also, she has really perfected the art of being the victim and being the underdog, and that's something else she has in common with the former president.
And it's very effective.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
effective.
and strategically, it's really smart to not build a policy record because then you can be whoever you need to be in the moment.
Absolutely.
One more story that I wanted to bring up was the story about how she went to Mark Sanford after his scandal and said, "You were supposed to endorse me, and now that's worthless. Give me $400,000 for my campaign." And apparently this article says she went and sat outside his office all the time and asked him for it. And they quote Mark Sanford. And Mark Sanford actually told this to the New York Times some 7 years ago, but it didn't get a lot of press. So Haley asked Mark Sanford and really said, you kind of owe it to me. He gives her $400,000. That was enough for her to get an ad buy, to get attention from Mitt Romney and Sarah Palin, and that put her over the top. If Mark Sanford hadn't given her that $400,000, she certainly wouldn't have been governor. And what's amazing is she cut Sanford loose after that, and Sanford says she has a tendency to cut people off after they help her so that she can perpetuate the myth that she's self-made.
I mean, he nailed it.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark
Thanks, Mark.
Sanford.
Well, and it covered everything that I thought that I knew about Haley. It covered and then some, this article. And one part that I was worried it was going to miss was the Sarah Palin endorsement. And do you remember when that happened?
I do remember.
So This happened on the day before Rhodes and Dare got married.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I didn't. No, I remembered it happening. I didn't realize it was the day before our
Yeah.
wedding. Sorry, thank you.
Seriously, because I was.
We'll cut that in production.
Well, my wife just is
She would
concerned that
appreciate it.
my wife just wants me to remember our wedding date. I don't think she cares when Haley was endorsed by Palin, but that's funny.
The reason that I remember that was because I was driving from the rehearsal to the venue for the rehearsal dinner, and I knew that it was going on, and I was like, I'm gonna swing by the State House.
Traffic
and it
was
just
terrible.
Bananas.
Now I do remember that happening in between our sort of pre-wedding
Yeah.
festivities.
Crazy.
2010, simpler times.
That's right. That's right.
So I think we'll all agree it's going to be interesting is the national media scrutiny and scrutiny from her fellow Republican Party potential opponents for the presidential race in the future will hold up. But I thought one thing is as great as this article was and as many details as it caught, I think it sort of gave her a pass on the Confederate flag. And for those of us who have lived in South Carolina since before the tragedy at Mother Emanuel, we can well remember, including in her race for governor, where Haley was quite reluctant, even just months before the tragedy at Mother Emanuel, to really take a stand on it. In fact, she said in a debate with Vincent Shaheen, I've spent a lot of my days on the phones with CEOs and recruiting jobs to this state, and I can honestly say I've not had one conversation with a single CEO about the Confederate flag. This is after boycotts and just mountains of angst about this, and when it was politically expedient, she saw what it had done with David Beasley and with previous politicians. When it was politically expedient, she was not willing to take a stand on it. I do give her credit for helping to marshal the resources and support to get it down eventually, but I think it's just another example of her willing to be a chameleon and to adopt positions not based on her core values. While this is clearly a value that's important to her as a person of color who grew up in South Carolina, but politically speaking, was unwilling or unable to do the difficult thing when she was running for office.
Right. And people forget that a lot of conservative legislators made very, 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 very tough votes in very red districts to get a 2/3 vote. And she was already auditioning for the national stage.
Well, she'd already been reelected as governor and was term limited. I mean, I've wondered so many times, how would this have gone differently if it had happened in her first term?
Yeah, but I'm just sort of the thing that I wonder about the flag issue is whether do we have the capacity to sort of unpack that as I'm sure the press will review her credentials going forward as the God, I hate to even say this, the 2024 presidential race eventually.
Womp
But
womp.
it's sort of her team has been very effective in terms of the myth making of who Nikki Haley is. I think this article presents some of the challenges to that, but on the whole, I think she's in a good spot going forward.
So find that article in Politico magazine, Tim Alberta, Nikki Haley's Time for Choosing.
All right, so legislation was introduced this past week. It was House Bill 3753, and it was basically inviting more garbage to come to our state, out-of-state garbage, which nothing makes me madder, really, than lobbyists and special interest groups trying to trick South Carolina into taking more out-of-state garbage here. We already take a lot of it. But there were authors of this bill, and they want to increase the limits of burning waste from 600 tons per day to 5,000 tons per day. Now, not only will this limit attract more waste-burning companies, which is what they want to do, they want to bring more companies in here that will burn waste and plastics, it will mean that we bring in more garbage from out of state. So I think this is an absolutely terrible idea. But it also relates to legislation that involves burning plastics into sort of a gassing process. And Chris, you spoke with an expert that told us a little bit about this earlier this week, didn't you?
I did.
Well, my name is Rebecca Haynes. I'm the Deputy Director for Conservation Voters of South Carolina, which means I'm a registered lobbyist and I'm up at the State House. Pyrolysis is the melting or gasification of hard-to-recycle plastics. It'll turn them into an oil-based product that could do wax for crayons or create jet fuel. This isn't necessarily a bad concept, but this type of advanced recycling facility wants to come into South Carolina and carve out an exemption for themselves with current legislation. Particularly, they do not want to have to follow our laws about financial assurances. This is something to protect taxpayers from being on the hook in case this potentially polluting, toxic, impactful industry goes under. We don't want to see taxpayers left on the hook for cleaning up a dangerous site, and we don't want to see our communities suffer from the pollution that it could cause. So we are trying to push back on this kind of overreach by the pyrolysis industry to change our laws before, even trying to see if they can work within the existing framework, which we think they can.
Wow. Well, guys, not only are we going to bring in more out-of-state garbage and we're going to gas it up and burn it, we're going to build more factories. The only thing...
But Rhodes, we're making jet fuel, man.
Well, that's what they say. Also, DHEC there's going to be very little oversight from DHEC, and there's no financial assurance that these facilities will be held responsible when they eventually catch fire. I think the only thing that could make this project worse is if they brought in Kid Rock as an advocate for advertisements.
Give them time.
This is just some flaming hot garbage.
A literal dumpster fire.
Very on brand for us.
All right, well, listeners, definitely pay attention to what's going on. Pay attention to House Bill 3753 and also Senate Bill 525, which involves pyrolysis.
Here's the thing about pyrolysis and this fight over, folks who are concerned about this bill are not saying no. What they're saying is you have to have adequate financial protections for the public, and there's a number of other industrial manufacturing sectors. There's been some great reporting by folks like Andrew Brown with the Post and Courier and Kira Eisner, and I'm probably leaving a bunch of folks out, but there's been some great reports about other industrial projects brought here, many of them with public subsidies by departments like the Department of Commerce, who have left taxpayers with the bill and the obligation to do cleanup when these sites turn into a toxic waste site next to somebody's neighborhood. So it's something to watch.
Our special guest this week is Steve Benjamin, the 36th mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, the first black mayor in the city's history. He has served since 2010 but has decided not to run for re-election this year. Zach Thomas and I had a chance to speak with him earlier this week via Zoom, and we also got to try out a new segment called Constituent Mail. Mayor Benjamin, thank you so much for being here with us today for our first Constituent Mail segment.
Well, glad to be with you, brother. Glad to be with you. It's funny because, since we're not in the office full time, we just get all types of interesting stuff. I wish I had the full package. It does show you, the kind of input you get from citizens. And this one from a citizen who shall remain nameless. Dear Mayor Steve, this is in May of 2020. Dear Mayor Steve, good time to kill off as many bars in 5 Points as possible while they're weakened by the corona. Once a bar closes, don't let it come back from the dead again. 5 Points since the 70s has become a cancer on the city of Columbia. Not a position that I hold.
Did that come from a D. Harpootlian?
No. It's not for elected official. But nonetheless, during some of the most challenging times, obviously indicative of the passionate feelings that people feel about things.
Well, Steve, while we have you, I wanted to ask you a couple other questions. First, what's your proudest accomplishment as mayor this last decade?
Wow. I try to use the word proud sparingly. I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunity to serve the city that I love. I will tell you that I was proudest of Columbia in 2015. 2020, obviously, when you talk to people about 2020 is now like a pejorative. The challenges that we face collectively. But 2015, you may remember, we had protests around the Confederate battle flag as we were living in the wake of the Emanuel 9 massacre. People came together. We watched the flag come down. Just a couple months later, we had the murder of Greg Aaliyah. So he was Forest Acres police officer. We watched the community rally and the amazing work that his wife Cassie has done since then. But we watched people rally, and then literally less than a week after that, we had the Great Floods. Depending on who you talk to, a 500-year, 1,000-year event, and I literally watched people from all across the city, people of every faith, background, race, people who've been here, landed gentry since probably the birth of Columbia, and others who are brand new, rich and poor, come together and work together to get through this incredible natural disaster. I think the spirit of community that I saw in the people of Columbia in 2015 is probably most representative of that city that we keep telling people that we aspire to be, that one Columbia. So I think I'd say October 4th, 5th, 6th, and the weeks after that in 2015 would be my proudest moment of the city.
Mayor Benjamin, you've had a successful tenure as mayor of Columbia. Certainly, I would call it successful. What do you think is the greatest challenge facing Columbia in the next decade?
Well, I believe the challenges facing Columbia are representative of those facing cities all across the country. But of course, my concern is this city. I think our biggest challenge is learning the lessons and acting on the lessons learned from this pandemic. The great pandemic of 2020 has served as a bit of an X-ray of America's body, and Columbia's body, showing a bunch of broken bones as it relates to everything from digital equity to healthcare access to the realities of income volatility and the fact that a significant number of our families pre-pandemic couldn't pay for an unanticipated $400 bill. It's made everyone focus on these issues because we're all being affected by them. I think the greatest challenge is determining that this new normal will be subjective, a subjective future, that our future desired state is something that we're going to have to create, and that the old normal we can't go back to. So this is a real opportunity for us to influence national policy, state policy, and by implementing local policy, for us to really fundamentally change the outcomes for families on the streets of our city. So I think adapting to the new normal and helping create that new normal with all the other, literally existential threats we have facing us, from climate change to the kind of the soul of the city. I think that's going to be the challenge of new leadership that takes on after I'm gone, and I'm excited about being a part of that as a private citizen.
Well, everyone's asking you what's next for you. So to be probably the 11th person to ask you that in the last couple of days, what's next for you, sir?
Sure. I'm going to focus my time and effort. I would tell you the silver lining of the pandemic has been a whole lot more time with DeAndre and our girls. I got our oldest is going to be heading to college in a couple of years. Our youngest is a couple of years behind her. So I'm going to be deeply invested in dad time and making sure that they're prepared to go off to school. In addition to that, I was deeply involved in the community before I became mayor. I'm going to be deeply involved in the community after I became mayor, pushing for policies, pushing for good people, and literally trying to change even the body politic of South Carolina, but just as a private citizen. So as it relates to politics, right now, nothing for me on the table. This has been the blessing of my life to serve the people of Columbia. We're gonna ride out these next 10 months hard. We're not stopping until December 31st. But as an elected official, nothing on the horizon right now.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's been a pleasure living in this city under your leadership, and thank you for helping lead us through the pandemic.
Thank you, Rojo. You guys take care.
Well, have a great day.
All right, buddy. All right, bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Steve.
All right, my man.
Hey, Rhodes, I heard you had a new podcast. Are you recording that from your house?
My house? What? My house? Am I a Neanderthal? No. I go to a studio, the Jam Room Recording Studio, right here in Columbia.
Really? Why the Jam Room?
Well, they've got professional-grade sound gear, great audio engineers like Zach Thomas, and the perfect setup for recording. From podcasts to the next great rock album, the Jam Room can help you with your audio recordings. I've recorded here with my band and other bands, and I can confirm you'll have access to the most amazing gear in the world right here at the Jam Room. All the latest and greatest equipment, and even vintage gear like early 60s tube amps.
You say they have great amps. What about a 1967 Vox AC30?
Yep.
What about Marshall Plexis?
Also, yes.
Well, do they have a mid-80s Roland JC120 amp?
Wow, Jessica, you really know your vintage amps. In fact, they do have a mid-80s Roland JC120 amp and a lot of other amps that'll make sure you can get the sound that you're looking for. Trust the experts at the Jam Room, located at 201 South Prospect Street, right here in Columbia, South Carolina. Well, I'm going to miss Mayor Steve.
It's good stuff. I mean, this is somebody who, believes that elected officials are supposed to use the power of government to save lives and do good things. And, I'm particularly appreciative of the work that the city has done in 2020 during the pandemic when, state government and the federal government were, frankly, an absolute dumpster fire. So congratulations to the mayor, and very appreciative of his service.
Also, I really appreciate Steve Benjamin being our first guest for the Constituent Mail segment. And if you are an elected official or know an elected official that would like to share some interesting, maybe angry, maybe funny constituent mail and then address it, please email us right here at Asylum South, because we're going to have a lot more constituent mail segments in the future.
At camp, we used to have this mail song that we would sing every day when the mail arrived. It's like, mail call, chow boogie, chow, chow, chow boogie, mail call.
we just found the jingle. That's amazing.
Actually, that might be the jingle right there.
Rhodes really like that. I can tell.
I really did. I kind of want to I want to whip out a guitar right now and
mail call, chow boogie, chow, chow, chow boogie, mail call.
What the listeners don't get is the shoulder action that goes with it is so priceless.
Also, not only are her shoulders in full force, but Lauren is wearing a shirt that says, "I like my butt rubbed and my pork pulled." And now butt rubbed is on the silhouette of a pig.
And it's B-U-T-T.
Right.
My butt rubbed.
Right.
That's in honor
Like
of
Boston.
Valentine's Day, obviously.
Yeah, it's very romantic.
It amazingly doesn't seem to have any grease stains.
Yet. I think
Bravo.
Asylum South was recorded and engineered at the Jam Room in Columbia, South Carolina. Sound engineering by Zach Thomas. Theme music by Rhodes Bailey, Jake Irwin, Evan Simmons, Spencer Collins, and Zach Thomas. Contributors are Rhodes Bailey, Lauren Manning Gandy, Chris Kenny, Jessica Lathrin, and Mike McCauley. Find us on the World Wide Web at asylumsouth.com, at Asylum South on Twitter, Asylum South on Facebook. Subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like Asylum South, rate the podcast so others can find it and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, this is Asylum South.